The network's commentary got so absurd that it was eventually called out on the air by one of its own guests. Jonathan Greenblatt, the director of the Anti-Defamation League, blasted MSNBC's coverage during his appearance on MSNBC on Morning Joe.
I've got to ask, who is writing the scripts? Hamas? The people who did this, they are not fighters, Jonathan. They are not militants, and I'm looking right at the camera. They are terrorists. It is a barbarian who rapes and brutalizes women. This was a massacre that was pre-planned. This was not destined to happen. It is not normal to shoot teenagers in the back, hundreds of them. So I just think, guys, get this story right.
I've been suggesting for a few days now that this is exactly what was going to happen. The American media, the left, liberals all over the world would go out of their way to make it all about Israel and all the terrible things they've done. Now, rarely do you see people from inside that circle call it out, but that's happened now. You've seen a little bit of it. Dan Abrams, I think, doing a fantastic job here, calling a spade a spade.
If you've watched left-leaning media coverage of the attack on Israelis, then you've seen, heard, or read whataboutisms and false equivalencies as a way to subtly or not so subtly defend the terror atrocities committed against Israelis, Americans, and other Westerners this weekend in Israel. The tenor of the commentary from numerous hosts, particularly on MSNBC, has been to try to shift the blame away from the terrorists and to the supposed real victims, right? MSNBC's Joy Reid tonight focused almost entirely on the suffering of the people of Gaza at the hands of the big, bad Israelis.
Which is not a surprise. This is the message the American media has been pushing for years. This is the reason why on the left, the Palestinians are given hero status. And they're beloved as if they're freedom fighters who are working their way against a big evil oppressor. None of that's true. The Palestinians just need to stop killing Israelis and accept a peace deal that allows them both to exist, and everything would be better. Not to say fine. But the clowns on MSNBC, their hatred is so obvious. It's almost embarrassing that they and the people who employ them just don't see it.
But that isn't even the worst of it. Saturday on MSNBC, a host named Ayman Moyeldin engaged in some utterly bizarre victim blaming, saying that both the United States and Israel are at fault for the attack because of failed policies.
What we're seeing today are very deadly consequences of failed policies, failure on the American administration's part to change course, to take a different course of action with how it deals with the Palestinians and the Israelis, failure on Israel's part.
Right. It's their fault, right? This is Israel's fault. It's the United States' fault. It's the policies that somehow justify or even explain the slaughter, rapes, and kidnapping of innocent civilians.
They believe that, though, and it's nice to see them actually saying it now. It's not opaque. It's straight up now. Violence is okay if the cause is right. They've lived this for a long time. Rarely do they say it, but for some reason, Israel's a big enough bad guy that they can say, hey, going after their civilians and killing their kids, completely fine by us. And that's exactly what they're saying.
And that ridiculous commentary set the tone for much of MSNBC's coverage throughout the weekend, where many hosts seemed determined to say, well, what about the Palestinians? On his show, host Ali Velshi called for nuanced reactions to the attack, which he demonstrated to mean really just criticizing Israel.
We've had a lot of statements from Americans, mostly Republicans this morning, but some Democrats who it's a bit boilerplate. It's Israel is our greatest ally, the only democracy in the Middle East, our strongest ally. We must stand with Israel. There's no nuance or recognition of anything that has been going on.
What is the nuance here? They're murdering these people because the Israelis deserve it? That's the only nuance that these people seem to understand. And Ali Velshi, not a very smart person, but he's trying. He's trying his best.
No nuance or recognition of what's been going on. Innocent women and children brutalized in the streets, families forced to watch their loved ones killed, dozens and dozens of innocent hostages being held captive. He wants American politicians to better appreciate both sides. And there's another host, a guy named Mehdi Hassan, who actually went so far as to retweet a post from an extreme Middle East commentator who predicted, quote, the scale of Israeli war crimes in Gaza is likely to exceed anything we've seen before. And when Hassan himself got on the air, MSNBC Sunday, he too jumped on board the both sides train by just trying to drum up sympathy for the terrorists.
And it's basically like living, Alex, in an open-air prison. That is the context that is so important for us to remember when we talk about Gaza as some kind of, strange, faraway place, people shouting with guns. It's actually a real place with real people, families, and they're living in horrific conditions.
They live in horrific conditions in an open-air prison because they're animals, okay? And they've elected animals, and you can take that however you want. But they've made the decision to elect people whose core tenet of their philosophy, political philosophy, is the destruction of Israel and Jews. That's what it is. So they have been walled off from the people they want to kill. They've been left to their own devices and said, don't kill us, do your own thing. And they can't do that. They still want to kill them. And now they're going after the people that control their water and power, which is not a very smart move, but that's what they've done. And not only that, they went and killed their kids. Now the next step in this is going to be people whining and complaining about how there's a humanitarian disaster taking place. It's one of Hamas's making, and the Palestinians emboldened Hamas.
Notice how all of a sudden context and nuance are important for MSNBC. But when it's a story that fits their political agenda, like, an officer-involved shooting, context and nuance go out the window. I mean, this is worse than just a double standard. Look, this is not a both sides story, period. The network's commentary got so absurd that it was eventually called out on the air by one of its own guests. Jonathan Greenblatt, the director of the Anti-Defamation League, blasted MSNBC's coverage during his appearance on MSNBC on Morning Joe.
I've got to ask, who is writing the scripts? Hamas? The people who did this, they are not fighters, Jonathan. They are not militants, and I'm looking right at the camera. They are terrorists. It is a barbarian who rapes and brutalizes women. This was a massacre that was pre-planned. This was not destined to happen. It is not normal to shoot teenagers in the back, hundreds of them. So I just think, guys, get this story right.
And yeah, he may be talking to MSNBC on MSNBC, but this is who he's thrown his lot in with. Okay, and the only reason they don't come after him the same way they go after other people is because he's a useful idiot. The ADL is used as a weapon by MSNBC to take on all the people they disagree with politically. And now he stepped out of school and called them out on their own garbage because they're not conducting his business the way they want him to. So now they're not aligned right now, so they're fighting. Just absolutely disgusting stuff here.
But they don't have any interest in that. Since Saturday, MSNBC has made 441 references to Hamas militants or the fighters. They are terrorists, full stop. And MSNBC's pathetic refusal to call them that is just shameful pandering to their far-left audience.
I would disagree with part of this. It's not shameful pandering to their far-left audience. It's what they do every single day. This is who they are. This is who MSNBC has always been. They're left-wing cranks. They're watched by left-wing cranks, but they are the Democratic establishment at this point. The Democratic establishment is MSNBC. They're not far left-wing cranks. So let's not pretend that they're talking to a fringe. They are talking to the majority of Democrats. They agree. They agree. Look at them. Find major Democrat players who disagree with what's being said here. There's very few of them. Most of them are right on board with this. Waving flags from the Palestinian Authority in the halls of Congress. Protesting in the streets outside of an Israeli embassy. Suggesting that a ceasefire might be necessary. That came from Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State. Just incredibly pathetic stuff here, but incredibly predictable stuff. Not a surprise from MSNBC. This is who they have always been. And this is who they will always be. And for the guy from the Anti-Defamation League, you've thrown your lot in with these people. These are your fellow travelers. They hate you. Understand that. And if Israel didn't exist tomorrow, the people on MSNBC would be happy about that. And this isn't about somebody saying a word you didn't like that you're going to call anti-Semitic because it's directed at George Soros, or criticism of a Jewish scholar being called anti-Semitism. No, sometimes criticism is criticism. And sometimes anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism. And the American left has a real anti-Semitism problem. I don't toss that word around a lot, but in this particular case, if you don't want Israel to exist anymore, you're calling for the destruction of a lot of Jews, and that's pretty anti-Semitic.